The Capitals pulled off the improbable by picking up a huge win against the first place Canucks. How did they get it done? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the improbable, the Capitals finding a way to pick up a huge win over the first place Canucks. First place in the Pacific. This is no small feat. It is a huge, huge thing. I'll talk about that in the show a little bit later. We will talk about how Chucky Sideburns, the outlaw, Charlie Lindgren, was clutch in the Capitals' victory. And then a little bit later, we will talk about how it was TJ Oshie's 1,000th game. So just to get it going here, talking about a huge win for the Capitals, and it continues with the trend of the pendulum that swings back and forth. Everything is done here recently in twos. The Capitals picked up two big wins against the Penguins and the Blackhawks. They lost two to the Jets and the Oilers, and now they have 1-2 against the Kraken and the Canucks. So quite a huge thing for the Capitals as they are finding a way to get it done and kind of defying odds that a lot of people kind of had this team pegged as not doing big things this year, that, especially after the trade deadline, that it appeared that they were going to be sellers, that they waved the white flag. But as it turns out, this Capitals team kind of flipped the script a little bit. And how did they do that? Well, when we started this season, when the predictions were made for this team, it was with a lot of old core players that were on this team, Backstrom and Ovechkin and all the old players. But something strange happened. Well, Nick Backstrom stepped away from hockey indefinitely. Then you saw Kuznetsov. He got traded out to the Canes, or he got waived and then sent out to the Hurricanes. And then you saw Anthony Mantha go out to the Vegas Golden Knights. Joel Edmondson is playing up in Toronto. So things have changed for this team this year, and you inserted a lot of youth. You saw Scarbosa introduced into the mix. You saw LaPierre. You saw Connor McMichael, Malenstein, those kind of players. So I think that it kind of changed the outlook, and it's interesting that as of late here, those young players have been key contributors to this team and kind of changed the outlook in a lot of these games. You take a look at Connor McMichael picking up the game winner not too long ago, that it has been huge, this young core of players. The Capitals pulled off the improbable by taking down the Vancouver Canucks, who currently sit in first place in the Pacific, defying odds. Again, I did not have that one pegged at all. It follows the trend, like I talked about, of losing two and then winning two. I have to be honest and say, I don't know if the Caps would be able to take down such a big opponent, but they handled the Canucks quite handily. The momentum was all in the Capitals' favor, and I can't, underline this enough that they did it against a truly great team. The Capitals started out giving up the first goal in the first period, but then they changed the momentum of the game because as you watch the game, you saw the Canucks get on the board. You thought, well, that is how it's going to go. This first place team is going to give it to the Capitals. But in the second period, the Capitals came out with fire in their belly and wanting to push the tempo of the game by tilting the ice in their favor. And they did that. And they got two big goals from Tom Wilson and Alex Ovechkin, who continue to be key contributors. But then when you take a look at how it was done, Wilson scored off a sweet pass by Miroshnichenko that Wilson drove past DeSmith. It was Wilson's 16th. So getting a solid contribution from even Miroshnichenko, given the fact that this was his second call-up this season, that he is making the most of his opportunity, like I talked about in the previous show. And if you're an everyday of the show, I've talked about that there was talk that, maybe he'll get sent down to Hershey or what's going to happen there. As it turns out, that Miroshnichenko is still on the big team and getting key contributions. But taking a look at, how Miro has played, his third point in 6 games since his call-up. So a huge contributor to this team. I think that he is finally, discovering his confidence. I think he's discovering his swagger, and quite something for quite a young man. And speaking of young players stepping up and making an impression, the young kid, Connor McMichael, got the primary assist, and Ovechkin, when he picked up the loose puck and drove it past DeSmith. So Connor McMichael, again, another one of the key pieces this season that's different than other seasons is that the Capitals are all in on the youth on this team. And I spoke about that last summer, that this has to be the year for Connor McMichael, and it has been, and he has been a huge piece, especially in Nick Backstrom's absence. The Capitals outshot the Canucks 14-5 in the second period, playing a clean style game and not giving the Canucks much to work with, and stifling, making the most of it, and ultimately not making the gaffes that have been their demise in other games, coughing up pucks, losing puck battles, missed assignments, those kind of things. The Capitals were engaged, and they knew and they know what is at stake. The Capitals defense was also clutch in the Capitals win. The Caps blocked 20 attempts by Vancouver. They understand what is at stake right now, and we're not even in the playoffs, but it's almost has the feeling of playoff hockey right now, because that if you don't win, you're going to be setting up tea time instead of worrying about who your first opponent is going to be in the playoffs. So the Capitals, I'm not going to write them off. I don't think anyone should write them off, as they continue to prove everyone wrong pretty much at every stop along the way. And the Canucks, a huge, huge win. This is one of the games that I said was the measuring stick, the litmus test for this team. If they could find a way to beat the Canucks, that could be season defining. They did just that, and just a really huge, huge moment for the Capitals doing that. The Caps blue line always plays that much better when Martin Feravari is in the lineup, and that was no exception Saturday night in the picturesque city of Vancouver. If you haven't been there, it is a beautiful city. He led the team with 5 blocked shots. We know that Martin Feravari was one of the guys that missed a fairly substantial amount of time due to injury, because he plays a heavy style of game. He lays the body out. He makes big hits, that kind of thing. So to have him back in the fold, anchoring the blue line, is just a huge thing. In an accurate assessment of the game, it was a true team win for the Capitals team that is doing their best to stay in the hunt by picking up a win in a game that many had the Capitals circled for losing. So let's do that. Let's hear it for the Capitals in a huge win here. If you are the one that's going to be shooting the arrows, you got to be the one giving out the applause when the team that you criticize loses. You also have to be that one that gives them the praise when they win. And a huge, huge win for the Capitals. Make no mistake about it. And this kind of, changes a lot of different things for this team. The biggest hope here, however, is that the other teams in the Metro continue to lose, and the Capitals can continue to win, of course. That would ultimately give them their best opportunity of sneaking in there somehow into a wild card spot or third place, or however it works out, that maybe the Capitals can sneak their way into the playoffs. If they can do that, I think that changes everything. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how Chucky Sideburns, the outlaw, it was clutch for the Capitals once again. Tell me if you've heard it before, but it bears repeating. Charlie Lindgren is saving the Capitals bacon on a night-in, night-out basis. How is he getting it done? I'll discuss coming up. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on 3% match. Robinhood Gold gives you the most for your retirement thanks to the IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. As you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Charlie Lindgren is clutch once again. Tell me if you've heard it before. Saving the Capitals, keeping them in there. And it wasn't just him. In a fair assessment, the defense, everything was dialed in. It was almost a perfect game for the Capitals, but giving credit where credit's due, there was some opportunity for the Canucks to get in there. But I mean, I guess I'm going to be honest here and say that, Charlie Lindgren wasn't overworked, but he made the saves that he needed to make. And sometimes that's kind of glossed over, but a huge contributor, not just in this game, but for the Capitals when they need him the most, and just really huge for the Capitals. The Capitals had their ace on the mound, or I guess in the crease. The Canucks were without their ace, Thatcher Demko. It was a duel between Lindgren and Demko, and Lindgren was a beast when he needed to be. Can I say that with the Capitals' great play as of late, that Mac decided, and I'm glad that he decided not to trade Lindgren, at least for now. I am happy because there was a lot of speculation. I speculated about it as much that potentially that Charlie Lindgren could be on the move. And why did I say that? Because, well, he had term left on his deal. He's got 1 year left. He's signed to a bargain basement contract. So he was very appealing to a lot of teams that are in the hunt of, making it to the playoffs, or their perception of making it to the Stanley Cup. That I do believe that Brian McClellan had quite a few calls on the trade deadline, but ultimately I think that he saw the way his team was playing and that they were trending in a direction that they would really need him, and the Capitals have needed him. Now, in a fair assessment here about Charlie Lindgren, he very well could get moved this summer, either at the draft or during free agency. But for right now, it's a really confident feeling knowing that we have Charlie in the crease. Just a huge thing. The Canucks had a lot of offensive nuclear threats with the likes of JT Miller and Elias Peterson. Luckily, the Caps had the answers and the correct countermeasures. Lindgren was near perfect and saved 21 of 22. He has now won 3 of his last 4 starts. So just a really huge thing for Charlie Lindgren as he continues to be just that backstop that the Capitals were looking for, and they're going to need him. And, some people are saying, well, what happens with Darcy Kemper? He is the number 1 guy on the team, just based on the length of his contract and how much money he's making. If we can think back a little bit in time, let's set our minds back to 2018 when the Capitals went to the Stanley Cup. They didn't do it with Holtby alone. Braden Holtby was the hot hand all season, and he faltered a little bit towards the end of the season. Philip Grubauer came in and played clutch, and it ultimately was a number 1-2 combo in net for the Capitals that got the Capitals to win a Stanley Cup in 2018. Now, I'm not going to always say that history is going to repeat itself, but potentially it could. There's always the possibility that Charlie Lindgren gets injured, something like that. So it is really great that they have a number 1 and number 2 and ultimately 3 and 4 that are, just backstops in net, because You take a look at it, say Charlie Lindgren got injured, or say Darcy Kemper got injured. They have really good options in Hershey, in Hunter Shepard, or Clay Stevenson, who last I checked was ranked number one in all of the AHL. And, I've talked about that in the show, and it bears repeating that it's interesting that when they signed Charlie Lindgren, he was kind of an unknown commodity, a question mark. Not a lot of people knew about Charlie Lindgren unless you were an extreme hockey nerd. But he came here on the cheap and just has made a name for himself. But, if we, just kind of to talk about his time with the Capitals here, he was huge this year. And if we think back to last season, he was huge in the month of December and then faded a little bit. I'm glad that whatever he's dialed in mentally, or, how he's different than he was last year, that he is here and just a key contributor for this team. Because, just a month or so ago, I would have said the Capitals were out of it. Sell the farm, get everyone out of here, put a for sale sign out, Capital One Arena, and just get rid of everyone. Things have changed. And I think that, it kind of, to a certain extent, was an accident. How would this Capitals team be playing right now? Say Backstrom, decided to limp along this season. I mean, I guess it could be said that, that Brian McClellan would have had an uncomfortable conversation with him and something like that would have happened. What if Kuznetsov was still here? Say Brian McClellan decided not to waive him, that, things could have easily gone in a different direction if, important decisions weren't made along the way. And it's interesting, some of the teams that got markedly better, they got better by picking up players outside of the organization. The Capitals looked internally, and they're doing really well with the young talent that they've had marinating down in Hershey. The players I've spoke about, Hendricks Lop here is far exceeding my expectation. He's playing far better than any other call-up that he's ever had on this team. Connor McMichael filling that void that Nick Backstrom left behind. Scarbosa filled in admirably in the center position. Malenstein on the fourth line, being that tough fourth liner that is just, will do whatever it takes to get a sweater on a night in and night out basis. And, that it's interesting that the Capitals had the foresight. Brian McClellan had the foresight that, we do have Clay Stevenson down in Hershey, but sometimes that doesn't always translate to the big team. And we ultimately don't know that he's like, no, I'm going to hold on to him for the push here. I think this Capitals team potentially could have what it takes to make a push for the playoffs. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself and say they are, in fact, going to make it to the playoffs, but they are trending in the right direction. They have the Flames coming up. They have the Maple Leafs coming up. It is a busy time of year for the Capitals with all the games that they have going on. And that bears repeating that, they probably are pretty tired. And I hate to use, exhaustion as an excuse, but when you're on the road and staying in a different hotel on a night in and night out basis, you need the steady eddies out there like a Charlie Lindgren holding it down. I feel like the Capitals play that much better when Charlie Lindgren is in net, because he's going to make the saves that a lot of the other netminders don't save. And I hate to say it, sometimes that's Darcy Kemper. So it puts him in an interesting position. And oftentimes I'll hear people say, well, why not Darcy Kemper? Why don't they want to move Darcy Kemper in? Listen, I think the Capitals would be all ears. It's just a team that's going to want to take on the amount that his contract is, the term that his contract is. But let's not see too far down the football field. Let's just keep it here in the 10-yard line here and talk about the here and now, and talking about where the Capitals are right now. Let's not talk about, that Charlie Lindgren might get moved this summer. What we know is it's a really great thing that we have him here in the now, because he has been just a pillar in that, helping the Capitals in their pursuit to do something crazy that everyone around the NHL thought was impossible. This old geriatric team, a lot of people had them dubbed as, is doing the improbable. They're winning games, and they're winning games when they mean them the most. And this crazy team that, is kind of a ragtag group of old players and young players, they just might do what everyone thought they couldn't do, and that's make it to the playoffs. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the big night for TJ Oshie, his 1,000th game, but it almost didn't happen. What am I talking about? I'll discuss coming up. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. And let me tell you something, guys. If you're watching a game and you're not that into it, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, the game is that much more exciting. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it was a huge night for number 77 as it was his 1000th NHL game. A huge feat for TJ Oshie and just a really special night as continued to be a key contributor as he has always been. Logged some heavy minutes in the game and to ultimately just to kind of generalize his time with the Capitals, just a really, really great hockey mind, a good hockey IQ, and it's evident out on the ice on a night in and night out basis. Even if he isn't finding the back of the net all the time, he has a hockey IQ that is off the charts. His deflection moves. He's a guy that you have to see in person to appreciate. But one of the better guys to ever do it, and a tip of the hat to TJ Oshie for a huge accomplishment. A big night for Oshie, who played in his 1000th NHL game Saturday night. The Pacific Northwest is no stranger to being injured and nearly missed the game last night with an undisclosed upper body injury. He is a guy that plays bigger than he is. He is not the biggest guy out on the ice, but don't tell him that. He will take on the biggest guy out there, whether that's to his detriment and means that he gets injured. He is a fierce competitor. Oshie dug deep and played in the game anyway, and he apparently felt okay as he logged over 20 minutes of ice time play. So he was able to push whatever injury he had to the back burner and really help the Capitals in their big win. Oshie became the 62nd U.S.-born player in NHL history to reach the 1000th game milestone. Not all players can do it, and he is only the 62nd U.S.-born player to do it. Quite a milestone for number 77. In 42 games played this year, he has 11 goals and 8 assists. In 1,000 games, he has scored 301 goals and 388 assists between his time in St. Louis and Washington. His high water mark was in the 16-17 season where he scored 33 goals. But if we take a look back on the trade that brought TJ Oshie to this team, that was a stroke of genius. Oftentimes we will think about the poor, moves that were made, the poor trades, Philip Forsberg, and sometimes we'll think about those. But the stroke of genius to bring TJ Oshie to the district is something that's huge, and he has been a huge contributor when he's been healthy for years and years. But that's the one ding to him, I guess, is that he is a bit prone to being bit by the injury bug. But when he's dialed in, there aren't many out there that do it better than him. But here's what he had to say. Thanks to my teammates, trainers, coaches, team, staff, doctors, and all the fans for all their support. I love all of you. Special thanks to my family for helping me live out my dreams. And he said at Capitals and at St. Louis Blues, because of course, he was a pretty big player for the Blues as well. And I can remember back when Oshie came to this team, he was a name that I was familiar with and was one of those, that was kind of surprising. Like they really went out and got a huge player. And he has been nothing but being a key contributor on this team for so many years. Talking about his upper body injury, they were talking about, this was earlier in the month. They were talking about Oshie was in high spirits and working on shooting, skating, and passing ahead of practice. The 37-year-old has been out with an upper body injury over the last stretch. On February 21st against the Tampa Bay Lightning, he was hurt on a non-contact play where he spun and fell to the ice in visible discomfort. That was on March 5th of 2024. And that was kind of one of those awkward things that we saw happen where he kind of spun. I thought it was his knee, just kind of based on the way that he was kind of going back and forth. But now they're saying upper body with this new injury. So it just seems like there is some sort of nagging something always going on with TJ Oshie. And I'm not going to fault him too much. Chances are that a lot of those injuries were that he was just giving his all, a true 100% each and every game. But, one of the things that bears repeating is he has been injured quite a bit. I actually looked it up doing research for this show and just talking about this season. On 222 of this season, upper body, 1219 of last season, lower body, 1125 of last season, upper body, 1124 of last season, upper body, 330 of last season, upper body, 1217 upper body, 1029. So there is a long list that I actually have to scroll all the way to the bottom of my page. There is that many injuries. I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but suffices to say he does get injured more than a lot of other players out there. But let's not, use that to diminish the great night for TJ Oshie, despite his, shortcomings. And sometimes those aren't even his fault. He is one dynamic player that the Capitals are really lucky to have in the fold. And one of the key pieces that kind of gives me a feeling of confidence as this Capitals team makes a push for the playoffs is that they have guys that have been there, they've done that, and they can answer the bell on some of the biggest stages in the NHL. And it's great to have someone like TJ Oshie that's done that before, Alex Ovechkin, Tom Wilson, John Carlson, those kind of players that have quite a bit of miles on their hockey odometer, that sometimes that is a stat that is not always quantifiable. You take a look at some of these young teams that make it to the playoffs. Sometimes they just burn out in a hurry because they weren't used to what it meant. I have a pretty good confidence this season that if the Capitals somehow, some way can make it to the playoffs, that it will be a team that is sprinkled with experience that can kind of tell the young players to, this is what to expect, and the young players to maybe help push the pace of some of the older players. And I think it could be a perfect marriage. If we take a look at what the Capitals did in 2018, it wasn't an exclusively old team. It wasn't an exclusively young team. It was the young and the old working together, driving the engine. And that's how the Capitals got it done. And, I don't want to say it's a blueprint, but if we even take a look back on the 2018 season, during the season, no one had them pegged as doing anything or winning a Stanley Cup. And even in the playoffs themselves, you take a look at Columbus, you take a look at Tampa, those different stops throughout the playoffs that led to the ultimate goal, that the Stanley Cup, everyone had written them off. There was no way they were going to take down Columbus. And then that they did, well, now there's no way that they're going to do it against Tampa. And now that they made it to the final round, well, there is absolutely no way that they're going to take down the Golden Knights because they're the best that there is. The Capitals did just that. And maybe this ragtag group of young and old players, they can relive some of their glory days and do the improbable, make a deep push, and dare I say, a Hail Mary pass out there, maybe make a push for a Stanley Cup. And I know that that's going to be crazy. And I know some people are going to say that's a crazy thought to think about, but I think that it's possible if the Capitals continue to keep playing the hockey that they're playing right now. There's a lot of similarities between now and 2018, a team that is held down by two really great goalies and a team that has a mixture of old and young players, but together it's a perfect marriage. And right now you are seeing the Capitals, running on all cylinders. Picking up that win against the Canucks was a huge, I'm going to go ahead and say, season-defining moment for the Capitals. Can they continue to keep that momentum going in these next stretch of games here? Everything is off. If they can find a way to back into victory or maybe just go headfirst in victory into the playoffs, that changes everything. The Capitals, like a lot of other teams, have a different gear when they make it to the playoffs. Don't write off this team because I think anything is possible. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team. Every day when you're done over here, make sure and check out Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and also on the Amazon free channels link there. Just a great option for you if you don't have ESPN or sports channel package, that you have the insiders of Locked On to get your sports news. Check it out. I think you will love it. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.